It started as a regular Tuesday night. The wind howled, rattling the shutters of my small suburban home, and a light snow began to coat the street in a silvery hush. I had been lounging in the living room, nursing a cup of cocoa, when I glanced out the window. That's when I saw him, an old man standing at the end of my driveway. He was facing my house, unmoving, as if sculpted from stone. His eyes, deep set and shadowed beneath the brim of an old fedora, seemed fixed directly on me. My heart gave a painful lurch as our gazes locked, but his expression remained void of emotion, almost lifeless. I waited for him to shiver or shift in the biting wind, but he didn't so much as blink, just stared. After what felt like an eternity, I set my mug down with trembling hands and decided to confront him. I pulled on my boots and heavy coat, bracing myself against the icy air as I stepped outside. But as I reached the middle of the driveway, I realized he was no longer there. The street was empty, the only sounds coming from the groaning trees and the occasional crunch of snow underfoot. And then I saw it, a small photograph pinned to a snowbank where the man had been standing. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled it free and turned it over. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my living room window, facing the exact spot where I had been moments before, sipping cocoa, oblivious. I whipped my head around, scanning the dark corners of my yard, my pulse thundering in my ears. Every branch seemed to twist into skeletal fingers, and the whisper of the wind took on a mocking tone. Heart pounding, I stumbled back into the house, bolting the door behind me and drawing the curtains with a ferocity I didn't know I had. I spent the night jumping at every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the clink of tree branches against the glass. Sleep was impossible. When the first light of dawn broke, pale and hesitant, I felt a slight reprieve from the terror that had gripped me. All night, maybe it had been a cruel prank, kids these days, with their smartphones and twisted humour. But as I approached the window to peek outside, my stomach lurched. The old man was back. He stood at the end of the driveway, framed in the weak morning light. This time, he held something in his hands, a long, thin object glinting as he adjusted his grip. Before I could reach for my phone, the doorbell rang, a shrill, relentless chime that cut through the silence. My legs turned to lead as I staggered toward the sound, eyes darting to the window every few seconds. But he was gone again. The snow where he stood was pristine, untouched. With shaking hands, I opened the door just a crack, only to find another photograph. This one was different. In it, I was asleep in my bed, the shadowy figure of the old man looming over me. My blood ran cold as I realized what the glinting object had been, an old silver dagger. The sharp blade in the picture seemed almost alive, eager. I never slept in that house again. I posted this here hoping someone can tell me what this was, or if they've seen him too. Please, if you know anything, let me know. Because even now, miles away in a friend's spare room, I can't shake the feeling that he's watching. Last night, during one of the harshest winter storms I can remember, my house went dark. The power outage wasn't exactly surprising given the weight of the snow whipping sideways against my old cottage's wooden beams. But that didn't stop the pit that settled in my stomach. I lived alone, miles from my nearest neighbour, tucked into the dense woods where cell service was a myth and roads were barely marked. Winter was usually peaceful, but tonight felt different. The wind howled like something alive, scraping icy claws across my roof and walls. I lit a few candles, setting them in scattered clusters across the room. Their warm, wavering glow pushed back at the shadows that seemed to creep closer, wrapping around the furniture like tendrils. As the minutes dragged into an hour, a rhythmic tapping pulled my attention to the window near the front door. At first, I brushed it off as the wind-driven snow slapping against the panes. but the sound was too deliberate, like someone knocking with frozen knuckles. Tap, pause, tap, tap. I felt my heart stutter, each beat louder than the last. Slowly, I moved toward the window, my breath clouding the air in front of me. As I peered through the frosty glass, my blood turned to ice. Standing just beyond the reach of the dim candlelight was a figure. Its face was hollowed, eyes sunken and dark, as if it hadn't slept in years. A mouth, wide open and frozen in a silent scream, revealed teeth rimed with frost. The wind cut across its pale, cracked skin, but it didn't flinch. My hands trembled as I stepped back, but the figure pressed closer. Its bony hands splayed across the glass, fingers white and thin as icicles. The tapping resumed, more insistent, as though it could sense my fear and was drawing it out, savouring the moment. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a cry as it began to push its face against the pane, cheekbones grinding against the cold surface. The tapping turned to scratching, a long, screeching sound that made my teeth ache. I stumbled back, knocking over a candle. The flame sputtered out, casting half the room into sudden darkness. The only light came from the twisted shadows stretching across the wall as the remaining candles flickered. I scrambled to relight the one I dropped, but the scratching stopped abruptly. Silence. A silence so thick, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My eyes flicked up to the window. It was empty. The figure had vanished, leaving only the faint imprint of skeletal hands, burned into the glass like brands. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat, wide-eyed, clutching a blanket as the storm gradually weakened. When morning came, the sunlight spilled coldly over the snow-covered landscape. The power hummed back to life, almost mockingly normal. I forced myself to check the window. There, outlined in ghostly precision, were the marks. Long fingers pressed so hard that the glass was singed where they'd been. The figure hadn't been a trick of the storm. I'm posting this now, still staring at those handprints that won't come off no matter how hard I scrub. The sun is starting to set, and I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that it's just waiting for the next storm to come back. I used to walk in the park at dusk, especially after a fresh snowfall. The crunch of snow under my boots, the way the world softened around me in a blanket of white. It was my favourite way to clear my mind. It had been a rough week at work, and the park was my escape. That evening, with the street lamps barely piercing through the shroud of fog and snow, I stepped onto the familiar path. I was alone, or so I thought. The wind carried with it a faint sound, barely distinguishable from the rustle of bare branches. I paused, tilting my head to catch it again. It was a lullaby, haunting and melodic, the kind mothers might sing to soothe their babies. It wasn't just a tune, though. There was something eerie in the way it wove through the frigid air, brushing against my ears and then fading out of reach. Curiosity tugged at me. Without thinking, I followed the sound. It led me off the path and deeper into the park, where the trees loomed taller and denser. My breath quickened, creating clouds that mingled with the mist. The further I walked, the louder the lullaby grew, until I stepped into a clearing I hadn't known existed. There stood an old playground, half buried under layers of snow, the equipment rusting and jagged. Swings, their chains groaning under the weight of ice, moved gently as if nudged by invisible hands. The creaking echoed around me, blending seamlessly with the lullaby. My heart thumped harder, a primal instinct telling me to turn back, but I didn't move. "Don't look back," a voice whispered from nowhere, close enough that I could almost feel the breath on my neck. It was soft, feminine, but it dripped with an edge that sent shivers racing down my spine. I spun around reflexively, ignoring the command. The air behind me was empty, just a stretch of shadowy trees. When I turned back to the playground, it had changed. The swings, now empty moments before, were occupied by small figures, children. Their faces were pale, eyes wide and dark like inky pits, lips parted as if caught in silent screams. Each child's gaze was locked on me, unblinking. One swing swayed harder, and a boy with frostbitten cheeks and hair matted with snow began to move his mouth. But no sound came out. The lullaby abruptly stopped, leaving a silence so profound it roared in my ears. My skin prickled as a new whisper slithered out from the boy's lips. "We told you not to look back." Suddenly, I felt an icy touch on my shoulder. My muscles froze. I couldn't turn, couldn't run. The hand tightened, the chill seeping through my coat, biting deep into my flesh. Behind me, the whispers multiplied, surrounding me in a circle of cold, rasping voices. "We told you." The last thing I remember before the world went black was the swing's metallic creak, louder now, matching the erratic thud of my heart. When I woke, face down in the snow with dawn breaking over the park, the playground was empty again. But the chill on my shoulder lingered, as if someone had left a piece of themselves with me, a reminder of the rules I had broken. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and check out my other content on the screen now.